A passenger plane is completely obliterated in the California hills.
It would have been a horrifying experience.
A 747 vanishes over the Atlantic.
747s do not fall out of the sky.
Fire erupts during a landing in Taiwan.
Mayday! Mayday! Mayday!
3 accidents, all linked to lapses in security. When the system fails...
What's the problem? I'm the problem.
A routine flight can turn into a tragedy.
The most basic rule of security, which is every person, every time, every flight, matters every single time.
Los Angeles International Airport, one of the busiest in the world. At Terminal 1, passengers and crew taking a flight to San Francisco are making their way through security. They board Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771.
Maybe you set me up with a scotch on your way back?
Among the 38 passengers are several PSA employees.
It's very common for airline employees to commute between cities for work, and so as people would take a bus to work, many airline employees take a plane to work.
Captain Greg Lindemood has been flying with PSA for 14 years.
Brakes. Brakes set. Flaps up. Spoilers retract.
First Officer James Nunn joined the airline only the previous spring. He's logged thousands of hours in the cockpit.
Thrust levers.
Today, they're piloting a British-built BAE 146 commuter jet. The flight to San Francisco will take just over an hour.
Can you ask him how it's been?
About halfway through the flight, Captain Lindemood worries about some mild turbulence.
Center, PSA 1771. Any reports on the ride ahead? We've had a little continuous light chop.
PSA, this is Rocky Mountain Center. It's not too bad.
My God,
That was a gun.
yeah. Squawk 77, Squawk 77. We've had a gun fired off board the aircraft.
Moments later, Flight 1771 plunges into a steep dive. Police find the crash site 175 miles northwest of Los Angeles. Almost nothing remains of the 30-ton passenger jet. This is one of the worst air disasters in California's history.
There were no wings, there were no fuselage, there was no tail section, there were no aircraft seats. There was just papers everywhere. And the strong smell of aviation fuel. We're making a frantic search throughout this remote cow pasture looking for survivors, and we can't even find deceased human beings, much less human beings that had survived.
43 people died on board Flight 1771.
Come on up here, guys.
Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board and the FBI are soon on the scene.
You ever see anything like this?
When the aircraft hit at such a high speed, it impacted and basically compressed the Earth, and then they released and it blew everything back out of the hole. With the total destruction of the aircraft, I mean, you had limited amounts of information that you could gather from the wreckage.
But this is not only an accident site. It's also a potential crime scene.
We knew that gunshots had been heard by the air traffic controllers.
Squawk 77, Squawk 77, we've had a gun fired on board the aircraft.
If the reports of gunshots were accurate, then I realized immediately that we had crime aboard an aircraft.
But perhaps the pilots and controllers were mistaken. It's up to the NTSB to determine exactly what happened on Flight 1771.
You try to arrive on scene with a totally objective view of what's going on.
The FBI is searching for evidence of a crime, the NTSB for clues about the crash. If they can recover the black boxes, they may find both.
That's about the first thing you do when you get on scene, find the cockpit voice recorder. You can't overemphasize how important that was in this case because we had no airframe left to work with. We really had no wreckage in the normal sense of the word.
After hours of searching through the shattered remains, the effort finally pays off. They find the plane's 2 black boxes. At the NTSB laboratory in Washington, Dennis Grossi examines Flight 1771's badly damaged CVR.
The case itself was basically crushed. It was bent in like somebody grabbed it and pushed it together like that. This is hardened steel, and we assessed the impact forces around 5,000 Gs.
Dennis Grossi knows the immense impact may have ruined any chance of hearing the last words from the cockpit of Flight 1771.
All right, let's give it a listen.
Despite suffering huge impact forces, the audio tape is still intact.
Flaps up. Spoilers retract.
The first 28 minutes of the flight sound routine.
You hear the flight crew talk, you know, do their normal procedures.
But in the final 2 minutes, events take a chilling turn.
Sure sounds like a gunshot.
And then all of a sudden, they hear, and we hear on the recording, this gunshot.
The tape confirms what the pilots had reported. 2 gunshots.
God, no, a gun. Yeah, no.
It was actually a very sobering moment because we realized that we were listening to a very routine flight that suddenly became anything but routine. The door to the cockpit was heard open, and a female voice, presumably the flight attendant, was heard to say in a voice that was filled with alarm,
"There's a problem, Captain!"
And we heard a voice, a male voice, which we presumed to be the captain, saying,
"What's the problem?" "I'm the problem."
Investigators now know that an unidentified male shot the flight crew.
It's always startling when you hear something like that, when you hear the commission of a murder.
That's 5 shots so far.
And then we could hear the cockpit door shut again, and another final shot, the 6th shot.
Before the tape ends, they hear one last ominous sound.
Within about 5 seconds, we picked up what's called windscreen noise. In other words, you could tell that the aircraft was accelerating.
The plane's in a dive. The engines are over-revving.
65 seconds after the murder of its crew, Flight 1771 smashes into the California hills.
It helped us to understand what we were investigating, the heinousness of the crime that we were investigating.
It just confirms that this wasn't an accident, that it was, in fact, a crime, and the FBI would be taking over the investigation from here on out.
The FBI must find the person responsible for this mass murder.
It's establishing who had motive, establishing who had access, establishing who was the intended victim.
Somehow, someone managed to get a gun on that plane.
A weapon was smuggled through LAX, one of the world's busiest airports.
Let's find out how that guy got on the plane, all right?
If the FBI can't find the hole in security, more lives could be at risk. Investigators are still combing through the wreckage of Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771. They're looking for an uncommon piece of evidence at a crash site. A murder weapon.
That's a hydraulic line, probably from the main gear.
The FBI, bear in mind, knows how to investigate crime. They don't necessarily know how to investigate an aircraft accident. So we would go ahead and do our normal investigative procedures and make that information available to the FBI.
Finding the weapon could help the FBI identify who fired shots on board Flight 1771.
We weren't sure that we would succeed because the field of debris was so wide and the impact had reduced the airplane to so many small pieces. We were very, very fortunate when we found the gun. It was an unbelievable stroke of luck.
It's a .44 Magnum. The shattered pistol leads to a morbid discovery.
When we found what was left of the gun, there was a portion of the finger between the trigger and the trigger guard. That went back to the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia.
The FBI has a weapon, a crime scene, and 42 murder victims. What they don't have is the identity of the 43rd person on board, the killer, and the way he smuggled a gun onto Flight 1771. The FBI soon uncovers a gaping hole in the security system at Los Angeles Airport.
What they had set up is a bypass for crew members and airport employees. You would show your badge and they would allow you to bypass both the metal detector and the X-ray unit.
It was a big loophole.
Is it possible that the killer was an airline employee? Using the passenger manifest, investigators identify 4 male employees who worked for either Pacific Southwest or its parent airline, US Air. Forensic specialists lift a fingerprint from the piece of skin found in the trigger guard. They compare it to prints of employees on the flight and find a match. The killer is identified as David Burke.
David Burke, he was one of those employees who would go in after he had landed and help to clean up the inside.
Investigators now know David Burke smuggled a gun on board, but they don't know why.
A motive gives you understanding. It helps to develop the full mosaic of the crime.
At the crash site, a clue is found in the midst of the papers that scattered after impact.
All of the paper on the aircraft, any of the insulation material on the aircraft, all that light stuff got blown up into the air, and then the wind carried it for, I believe, miles.
Investigators come across a note scribbled on an air sickness bag. The handwriting is a match to David Burke's.
Hi, Ray. I think it's sort of ironical that we end up like this. I asked for some leniency for my family, remember? Well, I got none, and you'll get none.
The Ray in the note is identified as airline station manager Ray Thompson. He was David Burke's boss. Three weeks before the crash, Burke was fired from the company after being caught on tape stealing from the in-flight bar proceeds.
He then came back for an appeal hearing on the day of the flight.
I've reviewed your file.
He was terminated by Ray Thompson.
Your appeal, it's been denied.
That termination interview was not a placid one.
Thank you very much.
That same day, Burke buys a ticket for Flight 1771, a flight he knew Ray Thompson would be on.
Ray Thompson lived in San Francisco, and he flew regularly on that flight to return to San Francisco at the end of the day. It was common knowledge among the employees that Ray Thompson would be on that flight.
Exploiting the employee bypass, Burke goes through security without being scanned, carrying his .44 Magnum.
Ray!
Ray Thompson probably has the most merciful of all the devs on that plane.
There's a problem, Captain!
What's the problem? I'm the problem!
Burke takes his own life, plus the lives of everyone on board. The tragedy of Flight 1771 compelled the Federal Aviation Administration to take urgent measures to tighten security.
The FAA came out and canceled the bypass authority, so therefore air crews and employees would have to go through the normal screening as any passenger would.
Now it's required that any employee that leaves an airline, whether they've been fired or quit or retired or whatever, must turn their credentials in immediately. Getting on an aircraft with a gun now, I won't say that it's impossible, but it's next to impossible.
All of these measures have made flying safer, but nothing can completely eliminate the risk of another David Burke.
One of the things that sometimes is difficult for those of us in the industry to deal with when we have to go through security, for instance, and do absolutely the same thing that everybody else does. Wait a minute, don't you recognize who I am? I'm the pilot. No, we need 100%. If we put a barrier up, the barrier is only as good as it is consistent. And that's true whether we've trained our people at the front counter to never do certain things or accept certain things, or whether we're talking about what gets past the entrance to the gate and on an airplane.
Air India Flight 182 flies across the Atlantic, 6 miles above the ocean's surface. On its way from Canada, the 747 is heading to London and then continuing to New Delhi. Captain Hansay Narendra is a veteran Air India pilot. Satwinder Binder serves as first officer. There are 329 people on board, including passengers and crew. 6 minutes after 8 in the morning, First Officer Binder makes radio contact with air traffic control in Ireland.
Shanwick, Air India 182, good morning.
Station calling Shannon, go ahead again, please.
Air India 182 is 51 north, 15 west at level 310. Estimate FIR at 0735.
Air India 182, Shannon, roger. Cleared for London, flight level 310.
Air India is flying below 2 planes, causing their 3 signals to momentarily converge on radar. But when they diverge, only 2 planes are visible. Air India is no longer on the screens at air traffic control.
Air India's not showing up.
Hold on a minute.
Air India 182, this is Shannon, do you read? Over. Yes, it's Michael Quinn at Shannon. We have a plane off radar.
Shannon Air Traffic Control alerts search and rescue teams. A 747 carrying 329 people vanishes into thin air. Air India Flight 182 disappears off the coast of Ireland.
We have a plane off radar.
Several ships in the area keep watch for any signs of the missing 747. Its last known position is approximately 180 miles southwest of Cork. 2 hours after the plane disappears, a passing cargo ship confirms the worst. Floating wreckage is spotted. Then, bodies. It becomes clear that all 329 people on board have died. Most of the wreckage, including the black boxes, has sunk to the bottom of the Atlantic over an area spanning 60 square miles. What caused the 747 to fall out of the sky over the Atlantic? Could it have been a bomb or some other kind of catastrophic mishap?
The search for the black boxes was urgent, and 3 countries participated in it: England, Ireland, and India.
It takes 2 weeks for searchers to detect the radio beacon emitted by the plane's black boxes. They lie more than 6,500 feet below the surface. On the 4th attempt to retrieve them, a deep-sea submersible salvages the recorders.
Estimate FIR at 0735.
Air India 182, Shannon, Roger. Cleared for London.
Both the flight data and cockpit voice recorders paint a picture of a routine flight.
The cockpit voice recorder indicated that there was no abnormality in the cockpit, no emergency. Every conversation was normal.
Custom? Yeah, custom seals to seal the bar before its arrival. Barring.
The cockpit voice recorder cuts off at exactly 14 minutes and 1 second after 8 in the morning. Kohler checks the flight data recorder and finds the same story. A perfectly normal flight until the FDR loses power at again 14 minutes after 8 in the morning. Kohler turns to the recovered wreckage for more clues. When he examines the floor of the front cargo bay, he notices something unusual.
We found that it had holes which are of a very special nature, penetration from inside to outside at a very high speed.
Similar holes are found in the side wall of the cargo bay. These also appear to have been blown out from the cargo hold. The clues point to what took down Flight 182. A bomb.
And so when the bomb went off, the explosion would have taken out the computers completely, and there would have been absolutely dead silence, and that's precisely what happened.
How did a bomb get on board Flight 182? Police and crash investigators in Canada scour the passenger list for clues. Air India Flight 182 originated in Toronto, but many passengers had connected via another flight from Vancouver. Canadian investigators make a breakthrough when they interview a check-in agent at Vancouver Airport. She tells them about a difficult passenger who wanted to get on the Air India flight in Toronto.
Okay. On your way to Toronto?
And I want my bag checked through to Delhi.
Sir, I can't do that. Your reservation is only confirmed to Toronto. That's true.
The passenger insisted his bag be checked all the way through to India.
Then I have to pick up my bag.
I can't check your bags through to India if you are not confirmed.
The passenger got belligerent. The ticket agent was facing a long line of people waiting to check in.
Oh, okay. I'll check it through. But you have to check with Air India when you get to Toronto.
The man's luggage was loaded, but he never boarded the plane bound for Toronto.
The ticket identified him as M. Singh. It simply had an initial, but no full name. We believe that name to be was fictitious, and that the person never intended to travel.
She broke the rules as they were. She should not have allowed that to go through for New Delhi Interline. But she was so bullied and so browbeaten by Mr. Singh in front of everybody else that I think to her eternal sadness and heartbreak, she gave in.
Singh's suitcase didn't raise any red flags when it was loaded onto the domestic flight from Vancouver to Toronto. But after the bag arrived in Toronto, it faced stricter inspections for the international flight to India. Why wasn't the bag flagged there? When investigators talked to security agents, they learned that the X-ray machine, which normally scans every piece of luggage, broke down that day.
The technology, especially the X-ray technology, were very weak, very in their infancy at that time, and it didn't work reliably. And in the case of the Air India episode, the technology went quite badly wrong.
This is what it will sound like.
Instead of the X-ray machines, security workers used a portable wand that triggers an alarm if it detects explosive chemicals. But the agents had little experience using it. Still, everything seemed normal, until security got to Singh's bag. This would be the last in a series of security lapses that resulted in the deaths of 329 people. At Lester B. Pearson Airport in Toronto, a suitcase arrives from Vancouver. It triggers a portable explosives wand. But the sound differs from the one agents were told would indicate the presence of explosives. The suitcase is eventually placed at the front of the jet. And the passenger who checked in the bag doesn't board the plane. Then, as Air India Flight 182 soars over the Atlantic,
They want about 30 custom seals.
Customs?
Yeah, custom seals.
most of the dead are Canadian citizens. This is the largest terrorist attack and mass murder in Canadian history. Police eventually traced the bombing to Sikh extremists living in British Columbia. One confesses to assembling the bomb and is sent to prison, while the suspected mastermind is killed several years later in India. After investigators discover the security lapses that allowed the bomb on board Flight 182, luggage screening at most international airports is overhauled.
In the case of Air India, the most important thing of all was passenger baggage reconciliation. No plane leaves with baggage unattached to a specific passenger inside that plane.
Someone made an exception, or someone failed to follow the rule, thinking it won't matter this one time. It always does. The rules are there for a purpose, and about the time someone decides they can skip them, even once, is when a tragedy happens.
Hualien Tower, good afternoon. Uni Air 873, visual approach 15 miles out.
Uni Air Flight 873 is nearing Hualien Airport in Taiwan.
Uni Air 873, continue approach, report at 5 miles out.
The first officer is flying under the watchful eye of the more experienced captain. They've been in the air for only 20 minutes. Traveling south, hugging the coastline from Taipei to Hualien.
It was what you'd call a puddle jumper. It was a short flight. You don't expect anything to happen.
Right on schedule, the crew prepares to land the MD-90. But as they close in, the first officer struggles with the landing.
Too high. Too high. You are sinking too fast. I have control.
The captain takes over the controls.
You have control.
The plane touches down with ample runway to stop.
You start rolling and it all irons out, so you're on the ground and you start to relax.
But as the plane slows, fire breaks out. Passengers panic.
Mayday! Mayday! Mayday!
It's suddenly a fight for survival on board Flight 873. Panic is as dangerous as the fire.
You can't expect any passenger to just sit in a seat and wait for an evacuation.
Evacuate, evacuate, evacuate!
Fire is consuming the passenger cabin with terrifying speed. The 90 passengers and 6 crew members have only seconds to escape. It takes more than an hour to contain the massive fire. 28 people are hospitalized, many suffering from serious burns. 1 passenger will die in hospital later. How did fire break out during what seemed like a routine landing? Hualien, Taiwan, an MD-90 has burst into flames during landing. Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council must figure out what caused so much destruction and threatened so many lives.
I got a call and they said there was a major accident happened in Hualien. I immediately rushed back to Taiwan.
Investigators from the United States National Transportation Safety Board and the Federal Aviation Administration arrived to assist in the investigation.
We've seen lots of in-flight fires. We've seen crashing into things on landing. I had never seen one where they had some kind of fire erupt after the aircraft got on the ground. Very unusual.
Okay, let's see if the tape can tell us anything.
Investigators turn to the black boxes for clues.
Too high. You're sinking too fast. I have control.
The plane gets on the ground without incident. So far, so good.
You could hear the thrust reversers, you could hear the speed brakes come up, you could hear everything from the cockpit as being normal.
We could pretty much rule out the flight crew having anything to do with this. The first they knew something was different was when they heard that sound.
It came right out of the blue.
Right away, you thought must be a bomb.
Explosives expert Ed Cattell is part of the investigation team.
There's a lot of pressure on a post-blast investigator to solve the case quickly. It could have been a bombing, and we just weren't sure what we were looking at.
Cattell identifies a likely detonation point, the burnt-out overhead bin above row 8. But instead of finding the holes typical of a bomb explosion, he finds the aircraft's skin ripped open along the rivet lines that join sections of the fuselage together.
The effects were more of a pushing and heaving than a shattering in a really high-pressure, high-explosive event.
Cattell concludes it wasn't a bomb that caused the damage. But if not a bomb, then what was the source of the explosion?
Let's check the rows near the blast area first.
We had no idea what we were looking for. You just look for anything that's just a little bit different from something else.
On the far side, underneath seat 7C, he spots something unusual.
It looked like a bottle or a jug of some sort. It looked like it had been ripped apart. It turned out it was the top third of a bottle.
I found something.
You could smell gasoline instantly. Not kerosene, are the fuel that is used in a jet engine.
It smells like gasoline.
What is this doing on this airplane? Gasoline is prohibited from any kind of airplane.
Could this be the source of the explosion? Investigators order up a chemical analysis of the fragment. The piece is soon identified as coming from a bottle of a common brand of laundry bleach. But lab results confirm that it wasn't bleach in the bottle.
No question about it. It's gasoline.
Everybody sort of say, well, bingo, we found the golden nugget.
The discovery only raises more questions. How did someone get gasoline on board an airplane? And how did it ignite? Investigators need to find out how a small bottle of gasoline ended up on Uni Air Flight 873.
This could take a while.
We're looking for things that are beyond the normal. We're looking for suspicious behavior. We're looking for items that are singled out by the screeners. We're looking for something that's not right.
Look at this.
A security guard has pulled over a passenger to inspect his bag.
There were 2 bottles that we can't quite tell what they are.
Let's see if we can get any closer.
Could one of these be the bottle containing gasoline?
Sure looks like a match.
It turns out the 2 bottles are identical and are the same brand of bleach as the fragment found on the plane.
The guard just put them back.
The security person then looked at the contents and read the contents, did not remove the cap, did not smell it, but gave it back and put it back down.
Investigators now question the security inspector to find out more.
Why'd you let the bleach bottles through? Why didn't you open them to check?
The bottle said bleach. He said it was bleach.
That time, there was a procedure that whenever there is a bottle, the inspector should open the bottle and smell it to make sure it's not a hazardous material.
We're opening the family cabin. Needed to clean. Oh, okay.
He did not actually open the cab and smell it and just let it go.
Can you tell me anything about the passenger carrying the bleach bottles?
Sure, I recognized him right away.
Investigators discover that the man who carried the bottle through security was a Taiwanese athlete named Koo Chin Choi.
The suspect was a very famous decathlon champion. Almost everybody knew him.
When Koo Chin Choi is brought in for questioning, he explains that after passing security, he gave his bag to a relative who carried it on board. He pleads his innocence to the media.
Because my family was on the plane. Why would I do such a stupid thing as to put gasoline on board?
It's up to the police to determine if Koo is criminally responsible for the bottles ending up on board. Air crash investigators have a different priority.
We did not look into the motive of the suspect. What we did care is how to improve safety. So our focus is what happened, how did it happen?
Where we were with a compartment that we knew had 2 bleach bottles that had gasoline in them, we're pretty certain fumes leaked out of them, and you get to a point when that becomes very flammable, and it doesn't take much to set that off.
2 bottles of gasoline end up in an overhead bin. But what caused them to explode?
Lab technicians comb through all the debris taken from the aircraft and runway, looking for anything that may have sparked an explosion. They make an astonishing discovery.
It was a motorcycle battery. And that motorcycle battery was also actually something should not be on the aircraft.
This motorcycle battery was found a couple of rows away from the bottle, and the top of the battery has been damaged, and it's exposing the poles, the positive and the negative terminals.
Investigators can now construct a theory as to what caused the explosion.
The gasoline may have leaked, created a vapor inside of that overhead bin, and as the aircraft came to a sudden stop, then the battery slid and created an arc. It would have created the explosion to blow the door off of the overhead bin.
We did quite a few simulations to prove that such scenario could happen.
The lid blows right out and there's a flash fire.
Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council concludes this is the probable cause of the explosion. But no clear answer was ever found as to why someone took banned substances onto the plane. After 6 separate trials, Koo Chin Choi was ultimately cleared of wrongdoing. The court concluded the evidence wasn't strong enough to justify a criminal conviction. Still, the aviation report calls for an overhaul of the Taiwanese system that screens for hazardous materials. Training for security personnel was improved in the hopes of preventing another disaster.
I'm willing to bet that nobody in screening in Taiwan ever misses another motorcycle battery.
3 horrific air disasters lead to fundamental changes in airport security procedures. But the threats are always evolving. For aviation authorities, there's a never-ending obligation to stay vigilant.
Whatever lessons were learned in the past will be somewhat relevant in the future, but not 100% relevant. And the aviation industry, government organizations responsible for security, and frankly, even passengers, have to be aware at all times and evolve with those threats.